Hello, Nathan. Good to see you here. And now the floor is yours, and you're welcome to share your screen.
Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, and good morning to Rika. I very much wish I could have been there in person, but unfortunately I have other travel plans that have made it impossible for me to do so. So you'll have to have me in this somewhat synthetic version. Let me just share my screen with you.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully be seeing my presentation now.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, very good.
Great. Thank you.
Oh, I will just get started. So I will speak with you about the subject of counterfeit products that are dangerous, either to the environment or to the consumer. And this is based on actually two reports that have been published recently. One is a study that we did, EUIPO did together with the OECD, that was published last year on the issue of counterfeit pharmaceuticals, and that's the bulk of my presentation. Unfortunately, the data for that study does not cover the period of the pandemic, because the study is based on customs data for customs seizures, and those data only become available with quite a time lag. So towards the end of the presentation, I will also speak about some more recent information that is indeed related to the COVID crisis. Just as a bit of background, the cooperation between the OECD and the EUIPO is something that has now been going on since 2015. And we published the first joint study in 2016, and since then we have published another 10 studies, so 11 altogether. And we are continuing this cooperation. We'll be publishing a study on the impact of counterfeits on small and medium-sized enterprises later this year, and there will be further studies coming in 2023 as well. So this is a very fruitful cooperation, and all the studies in one way or another look at trade, international trade in counterfeit goods and various aspects of that. So far, the findings of these studies are that it's a very big problem. If we look at the overall, the international trade in counterfeit goods amounts to, from the point of view of the EU, constitutes 5.8% of imports into the European Union from the rest of the world, or 120 billion or 119 billion euros per year. So 5.8% is maybe not such a huge percentage, but a small percentage of a big number is still a very big number. So this is quite a staggering figure. And remember that that this is just an estimation of the imports of counterfeits into the EU. Of course, there is also production of counterfeits that takes place within the EU, and that is not included in this figure. So the real problem is even bigger. What we also find is that fake goods originate from virtually all economies, although certain countries such as China clearly dominate that business. Another common finding is that the people, to ship this amount of counterfeit goods into the EU is not something that is done by amateurs. It's something that is done by organized crime groups. And they are very good at using the same kind of modern logistical solution that facilitate trade, international trade in general. They're very good at abusing those solutions for their purposes of selling counterfeit goods. So these are things like free trade zones, online commerce, private express companies, and so on. Another, let's say, takeaway that we have from the studies is that anything that is branded and protected with a trademark can be faked. There is a common perception that counterfeit goods is something that is a problem that affects mainly luxury products, like we all know about the fake handbags and things like that, and of course that is the case. But indeed, what we have seen is that everything can be faked, even very, very ordinary products like laundry detergent, which costs just a few euros in the supermarket. But even then, if the profit margin is high, if the consumers value a brand, then that brand will be faked. And the effects of all this are both economic in terms of lost jobs, lost revenue for the legitimate companies, the lost tax revenues to the government, because people who are engaged in illegal activities normally don't pay taxes on those activities. And then there is what concerns us here most, namely health, the damage to health, safety, and the environment. Okay, so looking at the study on counterfeit medicines, what we wanted to look at there is to take a more detailed look at what types of medicines are targeted, how big is the problem, how do the criminals operate, what are the key trade routes, so where do the fake medicines come from, and what are some of the health risks that arise from this. The data on which this study is based is mainly, as I said before, is mainly based the data on custom seizures that we get from three main sources. The World Customs Organizations, the European Commission, DG TaxSuit, for seizures at the EU border, and the United States Department of Homeland Security for seizures of goods entering the United States. We combine it with other data from enforcers. We also have some qualitative information. We have discussions with customs officers and with police to try to get some, to learn some more what is behind those numbers. So now, what did we find? The fake pharma is a very attractive thing for criminals. Why? Because the profit margins are high. The cost of productions are very low. You have high profit margins that can be as high indeed as profit margins on selling cocaine or heroin or other types of illegal narcotics. The risk of being caught is low, and being caught and prosecuted is low. And if you do get caught, the penalties are relatively weak in most countries. Certainly, if you compare counterfeit pharmaceuticals to the examples I gave before, cocaine or heroin, the penalties are much, much milder. And then it's easy to cheat the consumer in this case also. Okay, and this is an important factor because as opposed to many other situations, when you buy many fake medicines are bought by people who think they are buying the real thing. In fact, in some cases, people go to the pharmacy with a prescription from their doctor, and there they end up with a fake. Why? Because medicines have very complicated and long distribution channels. And so there are many places where the counterfeiters can infiltrate the legitimate distribution channel. And therefore, the pharmacist, of course, is unknowingly selling a fake medication to a customer who is buying it, or to a patient who is buying it unknowingly. So it's relatively easy to deceive the consumer. It's hard to tell a fake apart from the real thing. So in terms of magnitude, what we saw is that between 2014 and 2016, fake pharma was in the top 10 in terms of which products are most counterfeited in international trade. The value was 4 billion euros or 4.4 billion US dollars. And again, as I said, this does not include fake medicines that are manufactured and consumed in the same territory, such as the EU. And now, what kind of drugs are faked? This is also important because I think there is a popular perception that when people hear about fake pharmaceuticals, they think about fake Viagra, for example, and they may even laugh about it because, of course, the consequence of taking a fake Viagra pill may be, let's say, embarrassment, but probably nothing more, assuming that it's just a placebo. But as we have seen, is that the kind of drugs that get seized actually also include drugs against malaria, against HIV, against cancer, heart disease, antibiotics, etc. So in other words, the fake pharmaceuticals are not just about what's called lifestyle medications, but also about medications for serious diseases where the consequence of taking a medication that at best is just inactive and at worst may be directly harmful can be fatal. And here are some, here to give you an idea what are the types of medications that are most frequently seized. So you can see that in first place we have antibiotics, almost more than 35% of all seizures, followed indeed by sexual, what might be called lifestyle drugs, such as Viagra, but much less, 15%. And then you can see for yourself what else is in the top 10. So painkillers, malaria drugs, treatment for diabetes, treatments for heart disease, and so on. So, this is serious stuff. The consequences of taking the wrong thing there can be quite serious. Okay, it's a global business, but the primary sources are India and China. And in fact, when we compare to the other types of counterfeits, then medicine is the only sector in which China is not number one. The number one producer of fakes. It is India. And that is probably related to the fact that India has a very large generic medicines industry. And so some of that production capacity is unfortunately also being used to produce counterfeits of branded medications. China is in second place in that business. And in terms of transit points, it comes into Europe through mainly the UAE, Singapore, and Hong Kong. There are some others, but these are the three most important ones. The target markets also are different for counterfeit medicines compared to other counterfeit goods, because for most counterfeit goods, the main target markets are the rich countries. So the EU, the US, Canada, etc. Because that's where the money is. But in the case of counterfeit medicines, African countries, which otherwise have a low income and therefore not particularly attractive for counterfeiters, but in the case of medicines, Africa is also a major market for counterfeit drugs. And this has to do with the way many Africans buy their drugs. They don't go to authorized pharmacies. They may buy them from the market, open air market. And this has very unfortunate consequences because we saw before that malaria medications, which of course are particularly relevant in Africa, are high on the list of fakes. And in the report, we have we reproduce some numbers that were produced by the World Health Organizations that estimate that as many as 100,000 African children die each year because of fake malaria medications. So this is clearly a business that is deadly, literally. As I said before, India is number one in terms of supplies, and that you can see on this chart, and both in terms of value and in terms of the number of seizures. In terms of value, then it is followed by China and some other countries. And again, free trade zones are misused as for other pharmaceuticals as transit points. It's a good place to repackage the drugs. And to Africa, it is often shipped in containers. So maritime container shipping is used. Whereas in the case of Europe and North America, the internet is becoming increasingly important to distribute counterfeit medicines. And this has to do, of course, with a general expansion of online commerce, and in particular with the increasing tendency for people to shop online for their pharmaceuticals. This tendency is more pronounced in some countries than in others, but certainly in North America and in some European countries, buying medicines online is becoming increasingly common. And again, this is misused. And we see that on this rather busy chart, I apologize for that, but basically what we see here is that the two pie charts at the top show the number of customs seizures. And you can see that the seizures of fake pharma mainly have to do with small parcels. So these are consumers who have probably bought some medicines online that gets examined in customs and is seized because it's fake. When we look at value, in terms of value, there also, we still see that more than half of the seized value comes in the form of small parcels, although the dominance of small parcels is now less pronounced, and air freight plays almost as an important role. Okay, so as I said, so we have the impacts. It's obvious when you're talking about medicines. There is a health and safety impacts. There is the cost of treating the patients who suffer the health consequences. So there is a cost to the public health system. And there is also, of course, pollution, because we don't know how these medicines are manufactured, but probably not respecting the rules, the environmental rules for dealing with chemicals, which is what we're talking about here. And of course, there are the usual economic consequences of counterfeit drugs. But again, in the case of counterfeit goods, in the case of medicines, it's the health consequences that are the most concerning ones from a society point of view. And so this is why this sector, let's say, warranted a separate study. Now I switch gear a little bit and focus on the impact of COVID, IP crime and COVID, and this is based on a presentation that comes from Europol, that was made by Europol recently at an event. So basically, what they are finding is that some of the developments that were already present before the pandemic were even more strengthened during the pandemic, and of course this has to do mainly with the rise of online commerce. Online commerce was, of course, already increasing before COVID came, but we all know that COVID really reinforced the tendency of people to shop online, and this also includes medicines, and this has created new business opportunities for groups of all kinds. Okay, so it's not only counterfeiters, but also outright fraud on the internet. Many millions of people around Europe have started shopping online only during the pandemic, and such people especially are a particularly good target for the groups. And I use the word groups very deliberately because, again, we are talking about organized crime groups. They are groups, but they're also very clever. They are very good at taking advantage of these opportunities that they present themselves. So what we have seen during the pandemic is that there is that depending on which product was a problem, the counterfeiters would take advantage. So at the beginning, in early 2020, when the pandemic first came to Europe and North America, there was a shortage of personal protective equipment, both whether we're talking about sanitizing gels or face masks and so on, and so that was the first opportunity that was taken advantage of. Later on, when certain medications started appearing in the media as being possible treatments against COVID, then they shifted to those, whether marketing fake medications of that type, or just engaging in fraud. The same thing goes for the home tests against COVID. That again, in the beginning were scarce. Today they are not. So all kinds of channels were used. Whether it's dedicated websites, social media played an important role, even instant messaging, and the targeting ranged from individual consumers to professionals, including doctors and pharmacists. Okay, so as we see, so we have seizures of face masks that are branded, either branded with names of companies that make legitimate face masks, for example, 3M in the United States, or in some cases also branded with brands of, for example, luxury good companies or football clubs or things like that. So it's really both kinds of counterfeiting that we have seen. And once vaccines became available in late 2020, early 21, but in the beginning there was a shortage of vaccine, and so of course fake vaccines or fraud related to vaccines became the thing. Okay. Today, it must be said that the issue, of course, with fake vaccines is an issue that today is not an issue really in Europe, because we have plenty of vaccines for everybody who wants them now. So that business opportunity, quote unquote, has gone away in a sense. Earlier this year, EUIPO and Europol published a joint analysis of what we call a threat assessment that is based on data for on custom seizures as well as other data, and this is of course related to the fact that IP crime is now a priority for the EU. It's one of the priority areas in terms of tackling organized crime. In what is called MPACT. The abbreviation for MPACT escapes me at the moment, but it is very important that IP crime has become part of the priorities, because it was not in the previous 4-year cycle. So this is quite important, and this is something that has been influenced partly by the analysis that such as the one that is published in that joint Europol EUIPO report. So this is just some data on custom seizures that really confirm the data I showed you earlier in the OECD report. The problem is increasing. It's now in 2020, it was the 7th most common fake product category that was seized in customs, up from 10. Some conclusions. That mainly originating outside the EU. However, increasingly, we are also seeing production in illegal labs inside the EU. And we also see that the fake medicines are shipped without any branding, and then packaging is shipped separately, and then the goods, the fakes, are then packaged and distributed inside the EU. It's a difficult problem for enforcement, because these illegal labs are difficult to find, they are difficult to detect, and they are not so expensive to set up. So certainly from the point of view of criminal network, this is very cheap operations. And indeed, some of the labs that have been detected have been run just by individuals on a smaller scale. There was an operation that was carried called Shield 2. It's an annual operation that is coordinated by Europol and is carried out in the member states and also outside Europe. So the most recent edition took place between April and October of last year. And to give you an idea, so 63 million euros worth of fake medicines and doping was seized around Europe. There were 33 criminal networks that were investigated. More than 500 arrests were made. Many websites were shut down, and many cases, 1,400 cases were opened. And as you can see, there are some other numbers. I'm not going to read the slide, but the bottom line is that we're talking big business here, and also what we see at the very bottom of the slide is that there were seizures related to COVID-19, whether it's fake medical devices, fake medicines, or raw materials to make such fake medicines. So very organized. And this concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to take any questions. All the reports to which I have referred here, whether it's the OECD studies or the joint report with Europol, are available on the EUIPO or the Observatory website of EUIPO, and you have the links here. I assume that the presentation will be distributed to you afterwards, and so please help yourself, and there is a lot more interesting detail in those reports. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you. Indeed, we have several questions for you. Let's see. Will you be up to answering them? So thank you for the presentation. And one of our viewers asks, well, given that the numbers are increasing of the counterfeit pharmaceuticals, what do you see? What are the possible solutions for that? For example, you also mentioned in your presentation, so one of the things why it's so spread, that there is, let me quote, low risks of detection, on the prosecution, weak penalties, and also the consumers are easy to trick, let's say. So where do you think we should start to tackle? Either is it the system, the penalties, the detection, the prosecution, or is it like more on the awareness side of the consumer? What do you think?
Yes, I mean, from an EUIPO perspective, of course, it's difficult for us to, we are not in a position to take policy positions. So we're not in a position to say, for example, that we think that it should be penalized more heavily and things like that. So I would say that I think a big part of the problem is indeed on the consumer side, and consumer awareness is something that we do work on quite a lot. In the case of fake medicines, consumer awareness has to do with basically teaching the consumer how to shop safely. Because in the case of some other counterfeit goods, for example, luxury handbags, people are usually perfectly aware that they are buying a fake. So there, the awareness, if we want to reduce that type of counterfeit purchases, then we have to make the consumer aware that by doing that, they are supporting organized crime, that, think about where your money goes when you buy that fake handbag on the beach in Alicante and things like that. But when it comes to medicines, most of the time, people are not aware that they are buying a fake. They are tricked. So what we have to do is to teach people how to avoid getting tricked. So, for example, how to know that the website from which they are buying is actually a legitimate online pharmacy, because it is a legitimate business. Online pharmacies, but we have to give the consumer the tools, better tools to avoid getting cheated, and so we work together, for example, with one of the civil society stakeholders in the Observatory. It's called the Alliance for Safe Medicines, or Alliance for Safe Online Pharmacies, and we work together with them, and they do a lot of work in terms of consumer education, in terms of telling people what to look for if they want to shop online. So I think our efforts mainly would run in that direction. On the enforcement side, of course, enforcement, of course, remains important. But if it's not for us to tell, member states that they should, for example, increase their resources for customs and so on, that's a decision that is, of course, up to the member states.
Yeah. Thank you. So, and there's also some other. Actually, there's a linked question to this. Are there any links, tools, how to check whether the pharmaceuticals are fake or are they real? So could you provide, if there are any registers, how to access them? So maybe a practical guidance? That was...
Well, registers, I don't know, but there are tools that are being developed, for example, to let people know that a particular pharmacy, online pharmacy that they're buying from is safe. In different countries, there may be different markings, there may be some certificates. That's something that is quite popular in Scandinavia, for example, and in the Netherlands as well, I think. So that's one way. And then there are technological solutions in the future. I mean, there is blockchain technology can be used to potentially to trace a product from producer to consumer. And to ensure that the product is safe. I'm not an expert in that technology, but we are working on that here at EUIPO in the context of the Blockathon project. And this is something that is, of course, targeted not only towards medicines, but towards all products in general. But it could certainly also be applied to medicines, so that the consumer would have a tool. Would have a level of security that she's buying the real thing, whether buying online or from a physical pharmacy.
Okay, thank you. That could reply. And we have also another question from the audience with probability. Maybe you know what are the data about Latvia, how we look on the other side compared to other countries. For example.
I understand. I understand.
Sorry.
When it comes to Yeah, no, unfortunately we don't. The analysis that we have is on the level of the EU, so we don't have this data on the level of individual member states.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and another question here is, could you please elaborate on environmental damage in regards of fake pharmaceuticals?
Sure. Some of this damage, I mean, there are two kinds of environmental damage that occurs in this, and that's true for all fakes, but especially for things like medicines, which are essentially chemical components. So the labs in which, these illegal labs in which medicines are produced, they obviously do not operate to the kind of standards that legitimate pharmaceutical companies have to meet in terms of how do you produce in an environmentally correct way, in terms of controlling waste and so on. So, I mean, these people, of course, don't care about that. They don't respect environmental regulations. They have no reason for it, because from their point of view, that would only increase costs. So that's on the production side. Again, some of the chemicals that are used to manufacture medicines, even fake ones, can be harmful, and we don't know how they are disposed of. And then there is on the destruction side, because of course, once these things are detained by customs, they have to be destroyed, and this destruction, also has to be done in a correct way, and and of course we know it will be done in the correct way if it's done by a public administration. But again, it's something that is costly and that has to be addressed. So these are the two main environmental